As always, safety first. I've got the balaclava on. Especially with a topic like today's, Corey, you really can't be too careful. We're going deep into the world of Gregorian Bivolaru and his organization, MISA. You got your articles and testimonies ready. I've got some insights to share. Ready to get into this?
Absolutely. This case is fascinating, but also a disturbing look into cults and those blurred lines you see between spiritual seeking and exploitation.
Right, so first off, who is this Gregorian Bivolaru guy? I mean, the articles paint a pretty wild picture.
Well, he founded MISA, which stands for the Movement for Spiritual Integration into the Absolute. Started it back in 1990 in Romania, promoting something he called Tantric yoga.
Tantric yoga, that sounds a little more intense than my usual yoga class. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, it's a complex practice with ancient roots, but the simplified version is that it incorporates sexuality into the pursuit of spiritual enlightenment. And that's where things get a little murky with Bivolaru.
Murky how? We're talking accusations of sexual abuse, human trafficking, even running a sex ring. That's a far cry from Downward Dog.
Exactly, and that's where understanding Misa's teachings is crucial. They presented sex with the guru, Bivolaru himself, as a form of consecration approved by God.
So you're telling me they believed sleeping with this man who was in his 70s during many of these allegations was their ticket to spiritual enlightenment?
Yeah.
Wow. I don't even know what to say to that. But the articles also mentioned Miss Shakti contests. What were those?
Basically beauty pageants, where women would compete in yoga poses, erotic knowledge tests, often unclothed.
Again, blurring the lines between spiritual practice and exploitation.
Exactly.
It's like he took the concept of tantric yoga and just completely twisted it into something disturbing. But the bigger question for me is why? Why would anyone, especially young women from Western countries, get involved with something like this?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's something we'll explore as we go deeper into this case.
Okay, well, before we do that, just want to remind everyone watching to hit that subscribe button. If you're finding this deep dive as fascinating as I am, trust me, you won't want to miss what's next. So back to MISA. The articles mention initiation rituals involving hypnosis, pornography, even orgies.
It was intense.
That's putting it mildly.
And that's where the psychological manipulation comes in. Former members described feeling pressured, even coerced, into participating in these activities under the guise of spiritual advancement. They were told that questioning Bivolaru's authority was like blocking their own spiritual progress.
So a spiritual blackmail situation. Do what I say or you'll never reach enlightenment.
That's a pretty good way to put it. That kind of power dynamic is a hallmark of cults. The leader becomes infallible, and any dissent is framed as weakness or lack of faith.
It's scary how easily people can be manipulated, especially when they're seeking something like spiritual enlightenment. But let's talk about the legal side of things for a minute. Bivolaru's history with the law is pretty extensive.
It is. We're talking about a man who was convicted of distributing pornographic materials as far back as 1977, and his legal troubles definitely didn't end there.
Convicted in absentia for sex with a minor in 2013, granted asylum in Sweden, extradited from France, and now he's wanted by Interpol for aggravated trafficking of human beings. It's a long and complicated story.
It is. And it really raises questions about how someone like this was able to operate for so long and evade justice in multiple countries.
Mind-boggling. So we've got this charismatic yet deeply troubled leader, a twisted interpretation of tantric yoga, and a string of serious legal accusations. But the question remains, why? Why would anyone join this group in the first place?
That's where we need to delve into the psychology of cults and understand the vulnerabilities that make people susceptible to this manipulation. We'll explore that more in the next part of our deep dive. Picking up where we left off, let's dig a bit deeper into what makes someone susceptible to a cult leader like Bivolaru.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to judge from the outside and say, I'd never fall for that. But these sources are suggesting there's more to it than just being gullible.
Right. Cults don't just target the weak-minded. They prey on universal human needs, like belonging, purpose, a sense of family.
So Bivolaru wasn't just selling tantric yoga. He was selling a community, a sense of belonging.
Exactly. He created this seemingly utopian vision of spiritual enlightenment and communal living. And for someone feeling lost, disillusioned, or just searching for something more, that can be incredibly appealing.
Especially when it's all wrapped up in the allure of something like tantric yoga. It makes it seem exotic, even transgressive.
Absolutely. It creates this sense of exclusivity, of being part of something special, privy to secret knowledge. That's a powerful draw, particularly for young people who are still forming their identities and exploring different belief systems.
Okay, so they're drawn in by the promise of community and enlightenment. But how does Bivolaru maintain control? How does he go from yoga guru to cult leader?
One key tactic is isolation. The sources describe how Misa encouraged members to distance themselves from their families and friends, creating a dependency on the group for social connection and support.
So they're cut off from any outside perspectives that might challenge Bivolaru's authority.
Exactly. And within this isolated environment, he uses a variety of psychological manipulation techniques. Love bombing, for example, showering new recruits with attention and affection to make them feel special and accepted.
Makes sense. It's like creating an emotional high that makes them crave more, further solidifying their commitment to the group. But what about those who start to have doubts? How does he deal with dissent?
That's where the guilt and fear come in. Former members describe being told that questioning Bivolaru was a sign of spiritual weakness, that it would hinder their progress toward enlightenment.
So any critical thinking is essentially shut down because it's framed as a threat to their spiritual well-being.
Precisely. And that's how he manages to maintain control and keep people from leaving, even when they start to see the cracks in the facade.
It's a truly insidious process. But how does this tie into the accusations of exploitation, especially those related to the Miss Shakti contests?
Well, those contests are a prime example of how Bivolaru twisted the concept of female empowerment to serve his own agenda. He presented these events as celebrations of female sexuality and spiritual liberation. But in reality, they were just another way to objectify and control women.
It's like he took this ancient spiritual practice, Tantric yoga, and distorted it into something unrecognizable. But how did he get away with it for so long? I mean, his legal troubles date back decades.
It's a complex question, and there's no easy answer. But part of it might be attributed to his ability to create a compelling narrative around himself, a mythology of spiritual mastery and hidden knowledge.
So he convinced people he was above the law, that his actions were somehow justified by his spiritual authority.
And that kind of belief system can be very difficult to break through, especially when it's reinforced by a tightly controlled environment and a constant stream of manipulation tactics.
So what does this all mean for us? Why should we care about the story of Gregorian Bivolaru and Misa?
I think it's a cautionary tale. A reminder that even seemingly benign spiritual practices can be twisted and used for harmful purposes. It highlights the dangers of surrendering our critical thinking and autonomy to any one person or group, no matter how appealing their promises might seem.
It's a reminder that cults can exist anywhere, not just in fringe religious groups, and that we all need to be vigilant, to question authority, and to trust our gut instincts when something feels off.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that seeking spiritual enlightenment, while a noble pursuit, shouldn't come at the cost of our personal freedom or well-being.
So we've seen how Bivolaru built this whole system of control within Misa, using Tantric yoga as a cover for exploitation. But you mentioned that his tactics are similar to other cult leaders. Let's talk about that. Where do we see these similarities?
Well, one striking parallel is Jim Jones and the People's Temple. He also promised a utopia, a spiritual haven, but it all ended tragically at Jonestown, with that horrific mass suicide.
Yeah, over 900 people died. It's hard to even fathom that. But what are the specific connections to Bivolaru, besides, the whole cult leader thing?
Both men were incredibly charismatic, masters of manipulation. They isolated their followers, creating a closed system where questioning or dissent was seen as a betrayal. They instilled a deep fear of the outside world, painting it as dangerous and corrupt.
So they created these echo chambers,
Yeah.
where their own ideologies were the only truth.
Exactly, and that's where the real danger lies. When people lose the ability to think critically, to question authority, they become incredibly vulnerable to manipulation and exploitation.
It's a reminder that blind faith, even in the pursuit of something like spiritual enlightenment, can lead to disastrous consequences.
Absolutely, and it's not just about the leader's charisma or the specific beliefs of the group. It's about the power dynamics. When one person holds all the power and followers are discouraged from questioning or dissenting, that's a recipe for abuse.
Okay, so we've got Jones. Who else fits this mold? You mentioned Charles Manson earlier. He seems like a very different type of cult leader.
Yeah, he is on the surface. The Manson family was all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. A far cry from Misa. But the underlying psychology is surprisingly similar.
Manson, the 60s counterculture, the murders, it's a dark chapter in American history.
Yeah.
But what specific parallels do you see with Bivolaru?
Well, both men had this magnetic personality, this ability to draw people in and make them feel like they were part of something special. They targeted young people, particularly those who were feeling lost or disillusioned, offering them a sense of belonging and purpose.
But Manson was also deeply disturbed, paranoid. He believed in this apocalyptic race war and convinced his followers to commit horrific acts of violence.
And that's another chilling similarity. Both men twisted their own ideologies into a kind of truth, using it to justify their actions and convince others to do things they never would have done on their own.
It's terrifying how powerful that kind of influence can be, how someone can manipulate others into committing acts of violence, or, in Bivolaru's case, submitting to sexual exploitation.
It is. And it highlights the importance of critical thinking, of questioning authority, and of recognizing the red flags of manipulation and abuse.
Okay, so I've got Jones, Manson. Any other examples that stand out?
One more I'd mention is the Source family led by Father Yod. Again, very different on the surface. They were all about health food, music, a kind of hippie spiritual commune. But beneath the surface, there were a lot of disturbing similarities to Misa.
I remember reading about them. They had some pretty unconventional beliefs and practices, right?
They did, and Yod, like Bivolaru, promoted himself as this enlightened being, a spiritual master with access to hidden knowledge. He had multiple wives, fathered numerous children, and exercised a lot of control over the group's lives.
And like Bivolaru, he used his position to manipulate and exploit followers, both financially and sexually.
That's right, and that's the common thread running through all these cases. It's not about the specific beliefs or practices of a group, but the dynamics of power. When a leader becomes infallible and followers surrender their critical thinking, things can go very wrong.
It's like there's a blueprint for abuse. That goes beyond any specific time or ideology. But how do we break free from that blueprint? How do we protect ourselves and others from falling prey to these kinds of manipulative groups?
I think it starts with awareness. The more we understand about the tactics that cults use, the red flags of manipulation and abuse, the better equipped we are to recognize them and avoid getting caught in their web.
So education is key.
Absolutely. We need to educate ourselves and others about the dangers of cults, the subtle ways in which they operate, and the psychological techniques they use to gain and maintain control.
And what about those who are already involved in a potentially harmful group? What advice would you give to them?
Well, first and foremost, I'd say trust your gut if something feels wrong. If you're feeling pressured, manipulated, or controlled, that's a huge red flag. Don't be afraid to question authority, to seek outside perspectives, and to reach out for help.
It's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to look out for one another, to be aware of the signs of manipulation and abuse, and to offer support to those who might be struggling.
Well said. And I think that's a good note to end on, exploring the dark side of spiritual seeking through the lens of Gregorian Bivolaru and Misa.
We've seen how charisma and manipulation can be used to build systems of control and exploitation. And we've examined the chilling parallels between Bivolaru's tactics and those of other infamous cult leaders throughout history.
It's been a sobering journey, but ultimately I think it's a reminder of the importance of critical thinking, healthy skepticism, and the courage to question authority.
And a reminder that true spiritual growth comes from within, from seeking truth and understanding, not from blindly following any one person or group.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I encourage you to stay curious, stay critical, and above all, stay true to yourself.
And remember, if you or someone you know needs help, there are resources available. Don't hesitate to reach out. Until next time, stay safe and keep diving deep.